address some of the issues related to the June 29th demonstration, but I'll get to that in a minute. I want to start off with a little bit of context first. Portland is an amazing city, and it has long supported the most American of values. Foremost amongst those values are the right to assembly and the right to free expression. We have a long history of demonstration and counter-demonstration, and we're proud of the fact that we have supported these uniquely American values over many, many decades. But I think we also have to be honest with ourselves. We have to acknowledge that in recent years, things have taken a dark turn. The right to assembly and free speech have been co-opted by a very small group of individuals who hide behind those important First Amendment values, not to come here to Portland to engage in demonstrations in favor of or in opposition to particular values, but they come here instead with the intent to commit acts of violence. These incidents of violence are alarming, and I want to be crystal clear about that. I'm going to continue to devote a considerable amount of time and energy working with law enforcement and others to find ways to reduce these acts of violence in our community. And I also want to address the perception that Portland is somehow a lawless city or that somehow Portland is a violent city. People who live here, people who know Portland, know that that simply is not true. I want to give you a little bit of data. Last year, in the city of Portland, there were over 200 protests. Over 200. People came, they had their assembly, they expressed their opinions, and they went home safely. And for the most part, people didn't even know that those demonstrations took place. The vast majority of them ended without any acts of violence, without any acts of vandalism. And I think that speaks to the good leadership of the people, the men and women who serve in the Portland Police Bureau. So then, let's talk a little bit about June 29th. And again, I want to give a little bit of context here before I get to the Q&A. On June 29th, there were no fewer than 3 different demonstrations taking place simultaneously over a 5 to 6 hour period in different parts of the city. And as I indicated, some people came to the city of Portland with the intent not to demonstrate in favor of or in opposition to any particular value. They came to engage in street fighting, something completely different. And the fact that this was a highly evolving situation, the fact that there were demonstrations in different parts of the city taking place simultaneously, the fact that there wasn't more violence, I think is a testament to the hard work and the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau. That being said, this does nothing to take away from the acts of violence that did occur in the city of Portland. They were alarming, they were disturbing, and from my perspective, they were completely unacceptable. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that those who are engaged in acts of violence are brought to justice. And as the Police Bureau in the coming days and the coming weeks evaluates the circumstances around the June 29th demonstrations, we'll be completely transparent with the public. I believe Portland is at a pivotal moment. The politics of our nation have become more divisive. The incidence of violence and hate speech that we're seeing in our community is increasing just as it is around the United States. And I'm going to continue to call together local and regional and statewide law enforcement. I had the opportunity this morning to meet with some of our federal partners. I don't believe Chief Outlaw and I are in a position to singularly or independently resolve this question without the community. So I'll be asking the business community to come to the table, I'll be asking community leaders to come to the table, and I'll be asking civil rights advocates to come to the table. Because we all agree we want the same thing. We want to reduce the incidence of violence taking place on our streets. There's one other issue I want to just raise, and that is that a number of the people who have been engaged in violence on the streets of this community, they're not from this community. They come from outside of Portland, and in some cases, they come from outside the state of Oregon. They come here with the intent to commit acts of violence. They engage in street brawls, and then at the end of the day, they go home. But they leave Portlanders holding the bag and dealing with the consequences. And as we saw in the last week, those consequences can even be global in nature. That is unacceptable. So I'll stop there. Those are my preliminary thoughts. I'll answer any questions that you may have.
What's your stance on Chief Outlaw's idea to ban face masks at protests like this?
So going forward, well, let me even step back one step beyond that. My team and I have made it very clear that, and Chief Outlaw made it very clear, that the perception that I somehow tied the hands of the police or that I called on the police to stand down on June 29th, that is misinformation, and that misinformation literally went around the world, and it's come back to hit us hard in terms of threats of violence, racist language, sexist language, hate speech that I'm used to enduring as the mayor of Portland, but others at City Hall had to endure that kind of hate speech and those threats of violence and even bomb threats and the like. So the consequences are serious. And my objective is I also have to acknowledge that even though this was based on misinformation, the fact that there was just this global shellacking in terms of perception, and there's no question that these kinds of negative perceptions around violence do hurt our community at some level. Of course they do. I have to take responsibility for that too. So I personally am rethinking my role. What could I have done differently in terms of announcements in advance of this communication, in advance of June 29th? What could we have done working with our community partners, the business community, civil rights advocates, and others to make clear again the expectations that violence to a political end is never acceptable in the city of Portland. And we'll be working with our community partners and others and our law enforcement partners and others going forward to ascertain how we can do things differently. We know we have to do things differently. And the Portland Police Bureau is an evolving organization. I'm an evolving mayor. I don't believe we can stick with the same game plan and expect to have a different outcome than what we had on June 29th. So I'll be evaluating a whole variety of options. The chief put a couple of options on the table during her press conference. I have a couple of ideas. I know civil rights advocates have some ideas, and we'll be going through those and determining what we can do differently going forward.
But what's your specific position on her?
I don't have a specific position today. I want to hear more about it. I certainly heard it during the press conference. I heard some constitutional and potential legal questions that were raised. I want to have the opportunity to meet with her and work with her on her perspectives on it. So I'm not ready to have a position on it today. There are a number of ideas that we can bring to the table. I'm somewhat reluctant to get into a laundry list today. I'll give you more information later, but I know that my colleagues on the City Council and I need to have some conversations about how other bureaus can participate in keeping our city safe and helping keep potential opposing parties separated during demonstrations. That's, of course, always the goal of the Portland Police Bureau during a mass demonstration, is keep opposing parties, particularly those that want to engage in violence, separated. And in other communities, their transportation bureaus, their fire bureaus, and others play a larger role in that. So I want to at least have that conversation with my colleagues. But there's a number of other strategies that we could potentially employ.
Would you revisit the ordinance?
So the protest safety ordinance is one that I championed and Police Chief Outlaw championed. I brought it before the Portland City Council, it was voted down 3-2. And here's just one of the realities of our form of government. I stand here alone today because as police commissioner and as mayor, I have the responsibility for the Portland Police Bureau and public safety in this community, but I only get 1 vote out of 5 on the Portland City Council. That is our form of government. The majority of my colleagues on the council opposed the protest safety ordinance. I don't believe they would change their minds on that, but we will be looking at other strategies that we could employ.
She also mentioned she would like officers to be able to continually videotape protests as they unfold. Is that something you support?
Again, that's of interest to me. I had a conversation with her this morning where she indicated that in some jurisdictions in other states, they have the ability to do that. In Oregon, we have very broad First Amendment interpretations in our state constitution, so I don't know if that's something that could actually be done here. But the way I'm looking at this isn't, which proposals today do I support and which proposals today do I not support. I think everything should be on the table, and we should have a thorough evaluation with our local and our regional and state law enforcement partners. We should have a conversation with the city council. We should include the business community and civil rights advocates and talk about what we're going to do differently to break up this cycle of people coming here to Portland to engage in semi-sanctioned street fights. It's not acceptable. Violence is not acceptable.
So all of these conversations can happen, but we're approaching anniversaries of previous violent outbursts. We've got things potentially being planned in the coming weeks and the coming months. So what's happening this summer while all of those conversations go on to keep people safe?
Well, for June 29th, there was a pre-action conference where we had all of our law enforcement partners in the same room, and the broad principles were established that we would not accept violence. And my principles have been the same since the day I took office. Mitigate violence, vandalism, don't let people block transit, keep people off the bridges, overpasses, and freeways for everybody's safety. And beyond that, the incident commander makes the decisions and makes the calls in real time during any one of these demonstrations. No 2 demonstrations are the same. They're all different, and they all have a different feel. June 29th had its own complexities to it because it was happening simultaneously in different parts of the city. We learn, by we I mean the police bureau, my administration, and others in our local law enforcement community, we learn new strategies during every one of these, and I'm sure after we have our after-action conference, after the police bureaus had a chance to take a good hard look at what happened on June 29th, they will be doing things differently. And as I frequently say, I think it's in our best interest to be as transparent with the public as possible about what we're going to do differently. I think one of the things we should do differently, previously I've held a press conference in advance of demonstrations where we know there are people coming who have the intention of committing acts of violence, and we've stood with local and regional law enforcement partners, and we have said what is and is not acceptable and what our expectations are in terms of public safety. We did send out a statement prior to June 29th, but we thought it was redundant to have a press conference. In retrospect, I feel that was a mistake. I believe that the public needs to hear that reassurance that we do not condone violence, that we do not support violence, that the police bureau will be enforcing the law to the best of their ability. The public needs to hear that the police bureau law enforcement professionals are in charge, not the mayor. And the fact that we didn't do that maybe helped feed into this global frenzy that somehow I, as the mayor, either called on the police bureau to back off or tied their hands in some way. That's just simply flat out misinformation. And so I think more communication earlier is one of the lessons that I've learned from the June 29th demonstration. But there'll be more.
Those statements came from the police union presidents who accused you of handcuffing the officers. Have you had any, and I saw your response on Facebook, I think, to his message. Have you spoken to him directly at all since then?
At the end of the day, Darrell Turner, who is the president of the Portland Police Association, and I want the same thing. We want a strong and effective police bureau. We want to be able to recruit top candidates for the police officer positions. We want to make sure that the police bureau has the resources and the tools that it needs to be effective. But he crossed a line when he publicly stated in a Facebook message that I was not allowing the police to enforce the law. That gave license to people elsewhere, particularly in right-wing political circles, but as I say, this became a global phenomenon. They came back to his message as the proof that I had in fact handcuffed the police during the June 29th demonstration. By his releasing that statement, he contributed to the misinformation and the noise. I don't think he did the police bureau any favors. I don't think he did the men and women who serve in the police bureau any favors, and he certainly didn't do me any favors. That said, Daryl and I have a relationship. We do communicate. We will continue to meet. He and my team have a relationship. And as I say, we both want the same things. We're just going to have to find a way to work well together going forward.
Mayor, you mentioned new solutions. What about some of the, I think that the police bureau put out before the events of June 29th that none of these events were permitted. Aren't there already laws about having unlimited marches and demonstrations?
Yeah, and that's certainly one thing that should be on the table is the question, historically the city of Portland has not enforced the permit requirement. They have, however, required people to stay on the sidewalk and abide by all of the laws. That is certainly one of the issues that should be on the table for conversation as to whether or not we should more aggressively enforce the permit requirement.
Do you think the KPP's decision to send that cement milkshake tweet was responsible given the rather thin evidence?
The milkshake again. So the police were trying to give real-time information to the public. I think in retrospect, now that we have the benefit of 2020 hindsight, we're doing a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking, they would probably agree that the word may or possibly should have been included in that tweet. But their intention, I believe, was simply to give the public more real-time information in the interest of transparency.
This has been a very persistent problem in the city. We tried to address it last fall with the protest ordinance. What have you done since then to get ahead of these situations as mayor?
Well, we've done a number of things. Number one, we meet more frequently with our law enforcement partners. The Portland Police Bureau under Chief Outlaw has become far more adept at understanding the ebb and flow of these types of demonstrations. We have certainly become better, I believe, at identifying people and attempting to prosecute them after the fact if they engage in acts of violence and vandalism. And on the whole, again, I have to remind people, there were 200 demonstrations last year, and the vast majority of them, the Portland Police Bureau was able to maintain separation and maintain public safety and allow people to continue to exercise their First Amendment rights. But as I say, with this June 29th situation where there was violence perpetrated, that we have to continue to rethink our strategies. We have to continue to evolve. So there will be new ideas put on the table, and there will be new strategies implemented going forward.
It seems like every time we have one of these, we just end up here talking about it. What's it really going to take? One of these happens, everyone's mad, we come back to the table with solutions, and it seems like we just continue to have this conversation.
Well, indeed we do. We continue to have this conversation, and we continue to have some of the same people coming into our community to commit acts of violence. And again, we saw that to a degree that took place on June 29th. And I am committed as the mayor and the police commissioner to working with the police bureau and others to help mitigate these strategies. I think what you're going to see happening different going forward is that we will be working more closely with the community at large. Because I'm hearing from the entire community. The business community is saying this is bad for business. I'm hearing from community leaders and neighborhood leaders saying this is bad for the fabric of the community. I'm hearing from civil rights advocates that they don't want us to use this as an excuse to tamp down on people's rights to assembly or free speech. So there's a lot of balancing that has to be done here. And we're going to work with the community to find that right balance.
What action would you expect businesses, local businesses, community leaders to be taking in trying to prevent these things, or stand up to people when they do commit a misdemeanor? I mean, what exactly are you?
I think it's a combination of the above. Number one, I think it's important to have not just the mayor stand in front of a camera and say, look, we know people are coming. We know that they are going to attempt to commit acts of violence, and we do not support that. It would be great to have a long line of community leaders standing behind me saying, listen, violence is not a Portland value, and it's not acceptable.
Standing up and saying that, accomplish anything if people actually do continue?
Yes, and I'll give you proof of that. If you look at my Twitter feed over the course of the last 2 weeks, what you're going to say is, you have not condemned violence. Even though I do it, of course, repeatedly. I condemn violence. And I've said it, and I'll say it again. I do not support violence as a means to a political end. People need to hear that message reinforced, and they need to know that it's not just a message coming from me, but that this is our community value. And it's been, I think, jarring to Portlanders to see news organizations and media folks and political pundits and others, not just nationally but globally, slamming the city of Portland and implying that this is somehow a lawless or a violent city, which we all know to be completely not true. We need to get that value out crystal clear to the world, that number one, it's not true, and number two, we're not going to tolerate it, and number three, if you come here to the city of Portland and you engage in acts of violence, the Police Bureau will do everything in their power, working with the district attorney and the courts and others, to prosecute you. It's unacceptable.
So you've said that you want community leaders to stand behind you condemning these acts. How would you respond to James Bucol, the chairman of the local Republicans, defending Joey Gibson in a civil lawsuit?
I don't think he should. Joey Gibson, of course, he's an American. He has a right to counsel. I think it showed some odd judgment on the part of Mr. Bucol to step forward and support somebody who comes to our community from Washington State. He's publicly stated in the past that he comes here with others who are often committed publicly to committing acts of violence. My understanding is Mr. Gibson at one point said that he came to Portland because he believed he could get people on the left to agitate against our local police officers. And he also did it in the context of a political campaign, a failed political campaign for the United States Senate. And I have to ask myself, what kind of person does that? I mean, the men and women that I know in the Portland Police Bureau, they give their all for this community. And to think that there's somebody who comes from a different state to our community to put the men and women of our police bureau in potential harm's way for his own political gain and publicity, that's beyond cynical. And so why Mr. Bucol would think that's worthy of protection and why he would put the GOP seal on it's frankly beyond me.
So this has been going on now in your third year of your term in office. This problem happens anytime basically there's a major protest in Portland. People have been injured. It's been hugely expensive to the city,
Yeah.
which has a tight budget. Nothing has changed. Why should residents trust your judgment on this issue?
First of all, I disagree with your characterization that nothing has changed. I think a lot of things have changed. Prior to my taking office, we had large mass demonstrations with widespread violence and vandalism. Not to in any way justify it or suggest that it's not important, but we have fewer incidents and they are more contained. And I believe the Police Bureau has actually done, on the whole, a very good job of maintaining separation. Their tactics for separation have become more effective, in my opinion. And their efforts to collaborate with law enforcement at the regional and the federal level have improved significantly since that time. So I disagree with the characterization, Gordon, that nothing has changed. I believe things have changed, but things need to continue to change because there are still acts of violence taking place in our community. Yeah, I want to say this too on a personal level. Andy, no, and I believe that's how you pronounce his name. I apologize if that isn't right. He and I don't agree on much. He and I have certainly had our disagreements in the past, but on this issue, there is no light between us, none whatsoever. What happened to him was 100% wrong. The violence that was perpetrated on him was wrong. It was unacceptable and it was abhorrent. And I want him and others to know that that is my core belief.
How have you been handling all the threats?
The threats that I've received, I sort of take it in stride at this point, to be honest with you. When I wake up and I'm not threatened, I sort of wonder what's going on in the world. It's just part of being the mayor of a large West Coast city. We're a progressive city. People know that on the whole. You know, I'm speaking with a broad brush that Portland's a progressive city. It obviously attracts people who are not progressive. They know that Joey Gibson, for example, and the Proud Boys and others, they know if they come to Portland, it will elicit a reaction. That's why they're here. That's why you don't see them in Vancouver. You don't see them in their home state or in their own communities. They come here because they know they will elicit a reaction. But for me, I just take it as sort of it's part of the job. People threaten to kill me. They threaten to blow up my house. They threaten my wife and my daughter who were sitting over there. They threaten my staff. They threaten public employees. They threaten to blow up City Hall. It's just sort of the world in which we live in. It's a divided world. And so I think my contribution to this, and maybe this sort of gets back to the question Gordon asked, why should the public trust me? Trust is earned. And what I hope they know about me is that that's not the world I want to live in.
Mayor, you mentioned Proud Boys, Joey Gibson, no, especially haven't mentioned the word Antifa yet. Do you have a message to those people? We do have a Rose City.
Absolutely. You know, my message is the same to everyone. My message is the same. If you are coming here under the guise of First Amendment rights to assembly and free speech, but your actual objective is to commit acts of violence or engage in a street brawl, I absolutely condemn that 100%.
Do you have a timeline of when you might have some more concrete solutions? You said you have a number of ideas for community leaders, business community, but do you have a time frame of when you might work?
I don't have a specific time frame, but there is a sense of urgency that I have about this. That, some of these same groups have already arranged to come. I think they're planning one in front of my house, which is kind of ridiculous, and I think another one's planned somewhere downtown in the coming weeks. And so I have a sense of urgency. I don't have a specific time frame.
You said you have one more question. You met with federal partners this morning on this subject. What do you think their role is? Do you think there should be federal prosecutions or what?
So Bill Williams and others met with me as a statement of support. They want to be helpful in any way that they can possibly be helpful. They understand the dynamics of local law enforcement and the complexity of managing mass demonstrations and containing violence, particularly when you don't know where it's going to break out and it happens in different parts of the city simultaneously. So I appreciated the opportunity to brainstorm with him. We talked through some potential legal strategies. At a hypothetical level, we talked through some potential tactical strategies. The chief outlaw was there. And again, I don't call tactics. That's the chief and the incident commander's responsibility. But we talked through, at least at a high level, I would characterize it as a brainstorming session as opposed to coming in with a particular agenda.
Has an after-action report been completed last week? Chief Outlaw said it was not.
It had not, and I don't know, Robert, if you have the time frame for that. Do we have a time frame for the after-action report? Okay, next 10 days or so.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.